All right, well, welcome to the May Hoards Dairyman webinar. I'm Corey Geiger. I'm editor of Hoards Dairyman magazine, and we're really pleased that you're joining us today for the webinar titled Focusing on Fresh Cow Strategies. Hoards Dairyman and University of Illinois have been co-hosting these presentations for the past 7 years. Our team consists of Jim Baltz at the University of Illinois and our Hoards Dairyman online media manager, Patty Hutjens, who is both are doing behind the scenes work to make everything run smoothly. I'm really pleased today to be partnering with Mike Hutjens. Mike was just selected as the National Dairy Shrine Guest of Honor. He is the 78th Guest of Honor, the highest award that National Dairy Shrine bestows. That organization certainly been around since 1949 and has 20,000 members around the world. Congratulations, Mike.
Thank you very much, Corey.
And Mike grew up on a Wisconsin dairy farm and attended the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And since 1979, he's been Extension Dairy Specialist at the Animal Sciences Department at the University of Illinois. Mike is active in the dairy industry, and that's an understatement, particularly in the area of feeding and nutrition. And our editorial team at Hoards Dairyman is pleased to be able to work with Mike on articles, books, and of course, these webinars. This month's webinar is sponsored by Zinpro Performance Minerals. And they've been a long partner over the years here on our webinars, and we're very excited to have Zinpro as our co-sponsor here. If you're listening to the live presentation, go ahead and download that PDF of the slides. And Mike, welcome to the webinar and take it away.
Well, Corey, thank you very much for your very kind introduction, and we're excited. We think we have a great topic for you here today. As you can see on the screen, it's going to be looking at fresh cow transition feeding, a very hot topic, and a lot of controversy, a lot of choices out there, so you're going to get the Hutjens bias as far as that goes. You can see our building there. That's where our program is coming out of the basement of that building there. That's the Animal Science Lab, and so welcome to the campus. So what are we going to do in the next 44 minutes? And the answer is, first, we're going to focus what I call on the three pillars of a fresh cow program. And like any other building, if you take one of the pillars away, the whole structure becomes less stable. We're also going to look at some of the most current research that's been reported in the last year. Some of that is in the Journal of Dairy Science. Some of that has been at ADSA meetings. Some have been at meetings that we've been attending. And then finally, some tools to say, are we doing a good job? What can I use to say, yep, I think I've got this transition / fresh cow program right on my farm? So, Corey, that's our marching orders. So let's get going here. Look at our first pillar. And of course, none of you are surprised. The first pillar is going to be the fresh cow ration. And here are some bullet items to take a look at. Remember this one because it's going to answer one of the questions later on. And that is, we'd like to see similar feed ingredients in the high group TMR. In fact, if your herd size is so small that your fresh group can't be mixed in a TMR mixer, you might just take part of the high group TMR and then spike it or add to it, and we'll tell you what we'll add to it. In fact, it's coming right now. We're going to make sure you meet amino acid requirements. That's going to be important, which means you have to have a model out there to see where your lysine, methionine, histidine, where your amino acids are in your metabolizable protein. In my fresh cow ration, I want to make sure I have some functional fiber, especially if we have processed our other feeds on more to the fine side, which is happening now in many farms, adding maybe 2 to 4 pounds or 1 or 2 kilograms of effective fiber. And that could be grass hay, alfalfa hay, or hay, or something like that. And or you could put a pound of processed straw in there. Most of us wouldn't want to do that because those are kind of empty calories. That's going to take up some space and slow things down. But in some rations, we need to slow things down as far as that goes. In my fresh cow additive pack, you're going to see these pop up a bit later, so let's delay that one. And then the Step Up program, and this originally came from the University of Wisconsin Veterinary College. I want to give them credit. And they said one of the neat things we could do when we look at our far off and our close up and our fresh cow and high group ration, if we could change the nutrient levels by 10 or 15%. So, for example, if the starch in the close up ration was 22 or 23%, we could add another, bring it up to 24, 25 in the fresh cow ration, and then bring it up to 28, 29 in the high group ration. Same things would apply to especially fibers, starches, and our rumen undegraded protein. So those kind of gets us started as far as that goes. This comes out of the Hoards Dairyman Feeding Guide, which was just released back at World Dairy Expo in 2018. It's a hard copy and also an electronic copy. And now you can kind of see the step-up numbers here as well. So today we're looking at fresh cow, but here would be the close-up dry cow. Now, when you see them in red, that means we've actually increased the number higher than what's in the guideline book, which is higher than the NRC. So a dry matter intake in my close-up group, about 30 pounds. My fresh cow group, somewhere 35 or 40. We'll give you more specifics on that in just a few minutes. And then here's the late lactation group. Milk yield is listed there. Metabolizable protein will come into play over here. Just a sidebar over here. When you look at this intake times the metabolizable protein, that number is about 1,100 grams. We now want 1,200 grams. So write that down next to your printed off sheet, because I think we want to make sure we get the amino acids there. If you're a rich dairyman, you may even want to go to 1,250 or 1,300, but that'll get a little more pricey. You can see the nice step up that we have here on energy here. You can see the nice step down we have here on NDF fiber. So those are kind of some of the guidelines that we would recommend you take a look at, and you're going to customize them based on your farm and your situation as well. And in fact, Corey, one of the questions that came in from the field that Patty put together, and that is, what do we recommend for starch levels in the pre and post fresh? And so if this works the way I hope it's going to work, we're going to be looking over here. This starch level, if you look at a maintenance diet, which would be the high straw diet, for example, that's going to be around 12, 13, 14% starch. I am now recommending to step that up. If you have a close-up group, I'm going to step that starch up to probably around 20%. And then the fresh cow ration, we're going to probably go up around 22, 23%. And the early lactation rations, we're going to be setting up at your targeted starch, which many rations are 25, 26, 27, 28. I would also add sugar, and I'd be adding about 4% sugar into my close-up ration, about 5% in my fresh cow ration, and then 6% in my early lactation ration. A lot of research to support that, but I think I really want to fire up, if you want to use that term, the ruminant bacteria in these two critical time periods. This shows you one of the challenges. This is some data that was put together by the North Carolina Processing Center, and it actually appeared in Hoards Dairyman last year. And now take a look, and what this chart is, a very busy chart. You can study this a bit closer later, but here's milk protein. This would be true protein. And so in the first 40 days, you can see that, and this is basically first, second, third lactation, and then Jim Balls did a nice job highlighting milk yield. Most of our herds here in the Midwest are going to be in that 26 to 30,000 pound category. But look at these milk protein guys and gals. You can see that they're below breed average. And you can see in the first 100 days, it can be below breed average. And I think this really intensifies the need to get enough metabolizable protein and limiting amino acids into these cows. And you can see it's a problem all the way through these lactation numbers and the and parity or parity as well. Butterfat, you can see the lower producing herds also suffer on butterfat side of it. And right now, with milk prices where they are, we cannot here in the Midwest give up components, because that's our bread and butter, as we would say out here as well. So a nice table that says, take a look at that. There's one of the things to write down with your herd. See where you are at with these protein levels, depending on level of production in the first 40 days, because I think that really reflects the fresh cow feeding program as well. So let's go to our next part of this program, and that is looking at some of the new research. This comes from the University of Illinois. You can look this up in the Journal of Dairy Science in 2017. And what they were feeding, you can see pre-fresh, and that's about, I went back and the last time calculated, it's about 10 or 12 grams in the pre-fresh. And then we are around in the... looking at my notes here, about 16 grams post-fresh. So what did this methionine do? Methionine is a pretty unique amino acid, as you'll see here in a minute. First of all, the good news is we got a bunch more milk. You can see about 9 pounds more milk in the fresh cow. That's about 4 liters, more liters of milk in the fresh cow. In the first 21 days of peak milk, you can see this carries right on through. And of course, this was fed, you can see there, for the first 60 days. The good news is it tracks with dry matter. And if there's anything I can do, or you can do in your fresh cow ration, is let's get some groceries, some dry matter into these girls. And so you can see in the pre-fresh diet, we saw about an extra kilo or 2.6 pounds more dry matter intake. Post-fresh, about 3.5 pounds more dry matter. In peak milk, you can see it holds as well. And that's one neat thing about these amino acids. It looks like they really set up. You're going to see some more data here in just a minute. Besides that, Dr. Lure's group also looked at liver functionality index. Big words for a Wisconsin farm boy, but the liver is much more functional. That's really important. when we start seeing a fat mobilization going on, more active neutrophil function, that's a white blood cell, a more killing ability to kill bacteria that may be coming in from the mastitis area or in the hoof area or in the uterine area as far as that goes, a decrease in oxidative stress and less inflammation. Inflammation, of course, really drives glucose, utilizes that as a source of nutrients. So that's kind of a win as well. And then there's also some nice shifts you can see responses in improvement in insulin status and a decrease in non-steroid fatty acids. That's your fat mobilization. So just kind of a win-win. And that's one unique thing about methionine. It's more than just an amino acid. It has some functions in animal immunity, animal health, and reproduction based on some Wisconsin data. So that's some pretty neat stuff, pretty dramatic stuff. In fact, I went back and reviewed that article this morning before the webinar, and it's all in the journal for those of you who want to read that. Then let's journey over to The Ohio State University and take a look at supplementing amino acids in the fresh cow diet specifically. And you'll see the reference here is our good colleague, Bill Weiss at Ohio State University. And what they did, you can see, is they fed basically a 16.5% crude protein, a higher crude protein diet, and then one that's really balanced. At a 17.5 with amino acids coming in with a commercial product. I cannot give you the grams of lysine methionine, but I did go back again this morning and double check that. And that ratio there is going to be 7.2% lysine and a 2.6% methionine, and that's the percent of the metabolizable protein fraction. What do you see here? Well, you can see in blue, we saw a nice response in both components. Those are statistically significant. And then they followed that throughout you can see another 60 days, and those components held right there. No statistical difference in milk yield or dry matter intake. And so again, you can see here, these are lysine methionine combinations hitting those target numbers, a ratio about 2.8 to 1. And that's kind of the magic number, although most of us are not only looking at ratio, we're looking at actual grams using one of the model programs. We then journey over to Michigan State and look at fatty acids. This is some Adam Locke's work. This is some pretty neat stuff. What they did, much like what Bill Weiss did, for a short period of time, for the first 21 days after calving, they fed 1.5% of the ration dry matter intake as these added fatty acids. That's about 2/3 of a pound, about 300 grams when I went back and double checked the paper. They looked at combinations of palmitic, that's your C16 fatty acid, which is usually notorious for driving milk fat. Oleic is an unsaturated one double bond carbon, and the researchers suggest that this improves fat absorption and utilization. So we'll take a look at that as well. After 21 days, these cows then went to a standard diet with no extra fat, and you'll see that they carried on very nicely. So here is the research results in the early lactation cows. Notice we've got the control diet, no supplemental fatty acids. This is considered what I call, I'm not sure Adam would call that, I call it the high palmitic acid one, 80%. Here's 70, here's 60, and now you can see the reciprocal is the oleic. You can see it goes from 10 to 20 or 30 at this point. What are those missing fatty acids? There are probably other fats that are in there, probably C18 versions or products like that. So what's the take-home message on this slide? Well, take a look, guys and gals. Tremendous production. You can see over 45 liters a day or over 100 pounds of milk, but look at statistically significant improvement in milk yield. And you'll notice that these three are identical statistically, but I always find that kind of interesting. I always grew up on a dairy farm saying, there's about a 3-pound difference here as well, but no difference here. Dry matter intakes, you can see a nice increase in dry matter intake, and that's always very helpful because it means it's going to help support that. You and I can all eyeball this and see this is a feed efficiency of about a 2 in most cases here. But again, you can see a nice improvement in dry matter intake. Those are not statistically different, any of those 4 here. Milk fat, you can see a statistical improvement in milk fat. Some of you would argue that's the palmitic fatty acids that's driving that. If you're curious, the fat content here is 4.08. This one is 4.42. This one is 4.31. This is 4.21. So modestly high butter fat. So these are fresh cows. They are probably mobilizing some butter fat, and that's exactly right. Here comes your NEFAs. No differences in NEFAs. Even though we got all this extra milk, we still didn't see a change in NEFAs, which means, and in the kind of the cut point, and some of the researchers say is 0.9. You get over 0.9, then you might be seeing some liver lipid risks as far as that goes. And again, no difference in plasma insulin. So the metabolism looks quite good as far as that goes. Again, think about this. Those of you online, I'd be looking at these fatty acids in my fresh cow ration if I was doing it. Then go up to our University of Wisconsin colleagues and take a quick look at hypocalcemia. I think this is a very important factor in our fresh cow diet, although it leads in ahead of that to some of our questions. So Corey, why don't you go ahead and read this question to our people and let them start voting.
This brings us to our first poll question here, Mike. Do you use dead cat approach in close-up cows? No, I don't do this or recommend it. Yes, I use partial acidified approach. Yes, I use fully acidified approach. No, but I use Zeolite supplementation. So let's open that poll up. It's in progress here for attendees only, and Mike and Jim and Patty and I are certainly watching as we go here. We got some distinct opinions that are abounding here as the poll is in progress, Mike.
Pretty neat. You're actively voting. Good. Go in and vote. If you don't want to vote, you don't have to vote, but we've got almost 2/3 the vote in 40 seconds, Jim. So we're not going to wait much longer. We're slowing down. Let's go ahead and close the poll and let's show this to everybody. And I thought this was a fascinating question. You can see that about 17% of you do not recommend this procedure or do not use it on your farms. 40%, basically a 50-50 split between partially acidified and fully acidified. We'll talk about that. And then we got 4% of you using Zeolite, and we'll talk about that as well. So this is really interesting to me. I would have thought a little different. I thought the partially acidified might be a bit higher. There's a tremendous amount of articles appearing in popular press at this as well. And so we'll be off and running on this one as well. So let's take a look at why did we ask about that? And this is a neat slide that Gary Etzel put together at the University of Wisconsin. This is the yellow is my cow's going to calve there. And here's the cut point, around about 8 milligrams per deciliter for total plasma calcium. Some people use 8.2, some people use 8.4, but this one is at 8. And here comes my cow in red, my milk fever cow. Notice you can see she takes a huge dip down here, and this cow has to be treated. She is a down cow, and she's in big trouble. And if you don't treat her, she's going to die. She's going to die. And you can see where these blood calcium levels are going to be. Here comes the green cows. These are your hypocalcemic cows. Notice they down here just before calving, they're down in lower blood levels of calcium. And that's going to affect the digestive tract, the reproductive tract, teat end sphincter. It just has some big effects. And so somehow we want to correct this one over here through a dietary one. And what's the effect of subclinical hypocalcemia? And again, you can see the reference down here in the Journal of Dairy Science. Those of you who want to check that out. I saw two big things here. Number one, the subclinical hypocalcemia. Remember, that's below 8 milligrams per deciliter. You can see an increase in metritis. These are risks, odds risk, 3.2 times greater risk. That cow is probably not going to clean and then have developed metritis in the uterus. Postpartum milk fever, beta hydroxybutyric acid. That's your ketone bodies there. A significant effect, a risk there. And then obviously more days open. And of course, we know each one of those are worth somewhere around $2 or $3 once you get by the trigger point. The one that, Corey, I get excited about is this one down here, and that is the hypocalcemia also has associated with immune suppression. And we know this cow is already immune suppressed, and now we know that we have hypocalcemia. The neutrophils aren't quite as good at killing the number and or the ability to phagocytize those cells. So, just kind of a double dip loss there.
And to amplify that, not excited but nervous of what that is.
Exactly right. Now you have two tools, at least I have two tools in my toolbox. The first one is my DCAT product you just voted on. That's your anionic product. We'll talk a few minutes about that as well. We are going to look somewhere below a 0 on that. A lot of us will be around minus 50. This is the magic number right here. If you're going to be using these DCAT products, check the urine pH from time to time, because if the urine pH is not correct, then, and this, by the way, is a fully acidified guideline, more about that in just a minute, then the cows don't lie. So something has changed. That was a big discussion in China. And that was, well, we were putting in the DCAT on paper, it should work, and yet the pH of the urine is over 7. And the answer is something isn't right. Either intake, sorting, the forage has changed, whatever the case is. We'll come back and talk about this calcium level here in just a minute. The other one you have, and that was one of the questions, and I'm a big fan of it, by the way, and that is the calcium supplementation, either by a bolus or with a paste product or with a drench. You got a couple of different ways of doing it. I think they work very, very effectively. Two things you want to look at. Number one, how much calcium are you giving in this bolus or in this drench or in this paste product? Somewhere around 50 to 60 grams per day is where you should be. So check your boluses. We were at Expo last year, and most companies had one or more of these products they could sell to you. The one of the best ones is calcium chloride, which is a quick release across the rumen wall. Sulfates, a little bit slower calcium release, and then calcium propionate, which is not a very high calcium product, but pretty biologically available as well. So look to see what is the level in your calcium treatment program, what is the source of that calcium, and then finally, I would like to come back with my boluses every 12 hours. Now, in some cases, you can't catch the cows because they're not lockups or head shoots or something like that, but those boluses are pretty much metabolized in 4 to 6 hours, meaning that calcium no longer is impacting blood calcium levels, being used for milk synthesis, being stored, being excreted, whatever the case is. So again, don't think that one bolus is always enough to get the job done. I like to call this my second generation products out there. These are chloride based primarily products, soy chlor, biochlor, animate. Those are all commercial companies here in the US. In Europe, they might have slightly different answers or products as well. I'm not a big fan of the ammonium salts because ammonium salt, that ammonium goes to the liver, and that's not as ammonium, but as ammonium coming across the rumen wall, and now the liver has to deal with that. So I'm not a big fan of that. Typically in that 60 to 80 cent range. Most of these products, not only are they providing the DCAD, but they have some other minerals and nutrients as well. Let's skip over the next one here. We'll talk about that in just a minute here. But again, I like to have part of this or calcium coming from these very biological available calcium sources. Don't have to have them in heifers. But again, in many of our smaller farms, the pregnant heifers and the pregnant cows are all in the same pen. It's cost, primarily cost as far as that goes. And the heifers don't need that extra calcium because the research says they will mobilize bone reserves there more effectively than older animals, and they have a higher gut absorption. In fact, the highest calcium absorption are baby calves as far as that goes. If you want to test your feeds, which I encourage you to do to get an idea of kind of where your DCAD is at, these are the Magic 4 and the formulas you can check online as far as that goes. Jim Baltz put this together. It's a nice slide, and that is what level of calcium should you have in the close-up ration. And these are these calcium deficient rations. What they're doing is making these cows calcium deficient for a period of time, forcing the hormones to kick in and mobilize calcium from the bone. I'm nervous about that one because it means you're going to deplete bone resources there. But this one kind of comes back about every 15 years. This would be the NRC numbers. If you're going to be adding, this is partially acidified. What do you mean by partially acidified? I'm dropping the urine pH to 6 to 7. And about 40% of you voted for that one. That's what you're doing. The calcium levels are lower, 100 to 125 grams. Fully acidified, we're really dropping the urine pH down to much lower levels. That will take more product, but now I have a little more safety range in terms of shifting in the blood here. You're going to increase extra calcium because the kidney is kicking out of calcium about 29 to 30 grams per cow per day. So you got to put it in there. And then that's based on some published research work coming out of the University of Illinois. So again, lots of different choices up here in terms of approaches on calcium. But the bottom line, we really want to take a look at this hypocalcemia. And I think the next year or two, Corey, we're going to have tests, much like we do for ketosis cow side, that we can look at and determine in the barn, right, where our blood calcium numbers are going to be at. We had a question about zeolite. This is a binder. This work done by Tom Overton, Dr. Tom Overton at Cornell University. Zeolite's a binder, and their research says it bound calcium, which is what they're trying to do, trying to make these cows calcium deficient, much like the low calcium diet. And it bound the magnesium, and they bound the phosphorus. They measured those three. My question is to listeners, what did it do to zinc and selenium and other trace minerals and macro minerals that might be there in the diet. Typically, you're going to feed about a pound and a quarter per cow per day, and that is going to be basically ash. So now I've taken another pound of room away from nutrients at this point. According to one source, this is going to cost me about $2 per cow per day. So it's about 3 times more expensive than what the traditional decaf products are going to be. What's the good news? Well, you don't have to fight potassium at this one here, adjusting your potassium numbers. And one of the Wisconsin groups told me that to reduce this cost, they're only going to feed this for 14 days instead of 21 or 28 days. A lot of cautions come in my mind with this product in terms of cost and binding. So you're kind of on your own. I know there's some veterinary practices up in Canada and some companies in Wisconsin, they are going 100% with this product in their program as well. Well, now let's visit, again, another area in Wisconsin, and just look at energy balance, ketosis, and they've done some really neat work here as well. For those of us who are wondering what is this negative energy balance, it's pretty simple. The cow is demanding more energy to produce milk than what she is consuming in her dry matter intakes. Remember we said those feed efficiencies in those Michigan studies, pretty close to 2, which means they're pretty close to mobilizing some fat in the NEFA show that. And so now the cow has to make up that difference. This is an older slide, Corey, that comes from Penn State that simply shows that negative balance, anytime this energy status goes below 0, these cows are negative energy balance. So you can see 1 week before calving, they may start going to below 0. That's why that dry matter intake in the close-up pen is so important. You can see my fresh cows are really drawing down on energy here and producing. Typically, it takes about 0.35 mcals per pound of milk. And so you can see these cows are producing 15, 20 plus pounds of milk off their back. The good news is, with good fresh cow management, by week 4 or 5, they're back to positive energy balance as well. So how many of these cows experience a subclinical ketosis risk here? About 30% of ththese cows will experience subclinical ketosis. It has an impact, as you'll see here a bit later, on milk yield and reproductive performance. The cut point that most universities are using is 1.2 millimole per liter. Notice in that Michigan State study, they were around 0.7, 0.8. So they were elevated. Normally about 0.3 is normal, 0.4, and you can see they're elevated. You can do this cow side, but here's the big news, Corey, and that is, at least in Wisconsin, unfortunately not in Illinois, you can actually test the milk from DHI and run beta-hydroxybutyric acid, these ketone bodies, on that milk. And of course, once they are over the cut point, in most cases, these farmers are going to come in and drench with propylene glycol or some other glycerol or some other glucose precursor to try to help these cows out and get them going. This is the big classic study some of you may have seen. In fact, I believe Dr. Etzel presented this in one of the Hoards webinar about 2 years ago. The big four herd studies, 2 herds out of Wisconsin, 2 out of New York. And what's the take-home message? Number 1, good cows. Number 2, this is what the farmer saw when he was observing these cows, and when they went in at these universities and tested these cows. Look at this, guys and gals. Remember we said about 30%, and these are really good herds. You can see that they're approaching 30, 40%. This herd down here over 50%. So it's a big challenge as far as that goes. This was done with the precision meters that do cow side testing. This data comes out of Wisconsin, from Ag Source. That's their record processing center there, and they are now offering milk ketone monitoring tests. And this is data from 3,400 herds, almost 250,000 cows. And what are your chances based on these tests in the first lactations? For the next lactation, heifers, if she is subclinical ketosis in the first lactation, it is about a 22% chance she'll be subclinical. Next lactation, look at my older cows, almost 50%. That probably reflects some of the liver challenges that these cows have experienced as well. But this is the milk test. And of course, now we can take a look at conception rate, and you can see that these ketosis levels will infect conception rate differently, heifers more severely, higher culling rates, and there's a cost associated with this as well. In fact, I know of several herds in Wisconsin, they will take in every week, they will take the milk from their fresh cow pen. These are herds that probably have 1,000, 2,000 cows, and take them to the lab because they want to know exactly what's going on here. And they're going to be using this test to see if they're making progress, which cows are at risk. That's one of the big criticisms with DHIA. You get the results back 3 to 4 days later, even electronically. And by that time, we should have implemented some type of a treatment program. So certainly there are some nice tips out there. And of course, a lot of this data comes out of Canada. Canada was early in on this one, especially up in Quebec. They were doing this now for a number of years before it's catching on in our labs like in Wisconsin, and some of the labs still are not offering it as well. Corey, I just thought I'd slip this one in here as well. This is the fat pad in the hoof of the animal. That's a cushion that is basically lipid or fat material, and appeared in a paper that I could not go online and find. But this gives a bit of a cushion to the hoof of the animal. And so just remember that, because here they did a study in which they looked at the effect of changing body condition scores on digital cushion thickness, or they abbreviated DCT. And we mentioned it gives a cushion to it. It's much like if you are standing in the milking parlor. In many cases, you will have some type of a rubber mat in there for the cow, for not only for the cows, but also for the people milking, to give them some relief as well. Here's a take-home message. It says cows with the highest score, meaning had more fat pad, had a 15% lower lameness score as far as that goes. And their dad also said this fat pad continued to drop after calving, with the lowest level at about 120 days after calving, which probably mirrors that body condition score change. So what are you going to do about that? And the answer is get some dry matter into these cows to try to avoid a minimum of no more than a half a body condition score loss in the first month or so. And if you look at some of Paul Fricke's work, this body weight loss has a tremendous impact on fertility as well. So we're looking not only at lameness, but fertility here as well. Well, our time is getting along here, Corey. We're going to go into graduation day. We just had it here yesterday and Saturday on campus. When do you move the cow out of the fresh cow diet? And here comes some more controversy and graduation. And in fact, Corey, we got a polling question to find out what's happening in the field.
Well, Jim's going to open up the polls, Mike, and the question is, how many days do you keep fresh cows in the fresh cow group? We do not have a fresh cow group. Less than 3 days. 3 to 10 days, 10 to 30 days, or over 30 days.
Well, we're off and running.
We have great turnout on this webinar, and the poll numbers are coming in pretty hard. We do have a leader on the leaderboard here and a couple second place votes.
Yep. Well, I tell you, time's tight here, Corey. We can't let those Democrats catch up. They're a little slow here today, the way it looks. Let's go ahead and close it, Jim, and share it. I found this really fascinating. In fact, I'm going to have to go back and listen. I want to write these numbers down. I'm not writing now, but here's a big problem, isn't it? Roughly 20% of the herds do not have a fresh cow group. I think that's a real challenge, a real limitation. Sorry about that. Ways I think in Q&A, way we can get around that. Basically, we got 2% basically said, once we're out of colostrum, we are going to put these cows into the milking group. You can see 18% have my answer. My answer is 3 to 10 days. I'll give you a clue on that. And the most common answer is, Corey, over half of you said 10 to 30 days. What's the problem? Well, my fresh cow, my high producing cow ration has more nutrient density. So I want to get my good cows there as quickly as I can. And in fact, some farmers just move them in directly after calving and a colostrum clarification right into the high group there. And over 30 days is not a bad answer. And you'll see why that happens as well. So, Jim, I'm going to click on this, and I think we're going to be off and running. Here is a national survey that we did last year that Jim worked on very heavily. And surprising to me, these are the top 38 Jersey herds in the United States that completed the survey. You will see that about half of them do not have a fresh cow group. And that just astounded me. And then we also asked what was the average days in fresh cow group. And some of you will smile and say, well, there's my answer, Hutjens. You can see 30 days was average, minimum was 10. The minimum was 10. And you can see a huge standard deviation, maximum of 100 days. So I think what an opportunity for Jersey breeders that are not doing this technology. We also asked what determined when you moved a fresh cow group. This, again, that Jersey study, remember, half of them said days of milk. I think that's not a good idea. It says it's a cookie cutter answer. It says, well, every cow at 20 days of milk can move on. That's not true. This is a great answer. A third of them said when the cow's general appearance. That's a great idea if you got a good herds person who can see these cows and say, yep, that Jersey cow or these Jersey cows are having a challenge. And then 23% is a really bad answer. And that is whenever another group of cows have to move in. So if I have a whole batch of fresh cows today and my pen is full, that means I got 10 fresh cows today. I got to boot 10 of them out. And then we're off and running. Here are some great tools that we'll talk about in more depth here in just a few minutes. Milk production, feed intake, body temperature, rumination activity. We'll cover those a bit later. Surprising. I think that number would be higher if we redid this, Jim, this survey. Rumination cows are coming on pretty fast. This takes a lot of time. You got to lock them up. A lot of people don't want to do that here. This one's almost impossible to do on a dairy farm, but away we go. So anyway, here's the magic line. We want to make sure that we do not move unhealthy cows into the heifer group, high lactation group, or another status. So they're going to stay in that pen until you have determined they are healthy, meaning either mastitis, uterine infection, lameness, appetite, age, whatever the case is. I'm only going to move these cows. And so that's why some of these cows may stay in the fresh cow pen for 30, 40, 50, 60 days because they're just slow going, especially some of our mature cows that may have had some liver challenges. I'm going to give credit to Dr. Dick Wallace. Some of you will recognize that name. Now works at Zoetis, was 16 years extension dairy specialist here at the University of Illinois. And he uses something he calls fat mud. And as a neat colloquium, you can see what each of these are. I'm going to give you his guidelines, and then I'm going to give you the Hutjens swag on this one. The first one is feed, and that is to monitor feed intake. He scores them 1, which is bad news, to 4, very good. I would probably score them 1 or 2, meaning 1, this cow's got a problem. Number 2, she looks to be very aggressively eating. When are we doing that? In the lockups. So we got this TMR in front of these animals, and some of these animals will attack the TMR, and some will not eat hardly at all. So pretty easy to do if you got a lockup out there or in a stanchion barn. Here are some nice guidelines. If you got a group of fresh cows, you can see these are guidelines from Dr. Al Kurtz, published in the Journal of Dairy Science. And this would be the typical increase in dry matter intake in week 1, week 2. This is heifers, week 3. And you can see you can see the cows are a little more aggressively, a little different slope to the curve here, but you can see the heifers are going up each week by about 3 pounds. That'd be about a half a pound of dry matter per day during that time period. Another one is attitude. And as we said earlier, it takes a good herds person. And again, I might go 1 and being a bad one and 2 being a good one. My dad, bless his soul, was very good at this. And he could just see when cows are really healthy and ready to take off. And of course, we were in a stanchion barn as far as that goes. Third one is temperature. Again, this will take some real time, unless you, of course, you've got some way of measuring temperature with some type of electronic recording device in the ear, or some area of the dairy cow. This is tough to do. I love it. It's a great technique because I know if a cow is running a temperature, she's fighting infection someplace. That's an inflammation response that's occurring here. And these are the cut points that Dr. Wallace was using depending on winter or summer here in central Illinois. Manure Score, great tool, especially if you lock them up or at a stanchion barn. You're going to be looking at scores 1, 2, and 3 primarily for these fresh cows. And of course, what we really want is not this. This is a score 1. This would not be a good manure score on my fresh cows. This would be a good one, acceptable, not a good one, acceptable one. You see it has more form to it at this stage, especially as we're changing diets. Remember, these cows are now on a new diet. So probably in the first week on the fresh cow diet, you're going to see some more looseness, much like a 2. And hopefully when you move them out, there are 3, and there are 3. So again, those score 1, 2, or 3. This could be done very easily on an app or a spreadsheet. A number of our pharmaceutical companies have these apps, and even some of our breed associations may have these apps as well. Number 4 of the MUD technician definition by Dr. Wallace is uterine discharge. And again, this could be done like a 1 or a 2. In other words, bad. This cow is ripe, for lack of a better word. She really smells. You may don't need to have the glove her. You got a problem there. Some people go in though and actually milk the uterus. Milk? What do you mean milk the uterus? They actually bring out that stuff, that pus, that foul-smelling colored material, and move it out so the cow doesn't have to drain out by gravity. They'll actually milk that out of there. In other words, they're not going to pull the retained placenta, but they're going to go in and pull out those fluids so the cow doesn't have to fight those with their white blood cells here. And of course, obviously, the 4 or 2 would be where you want to go. Here are some other tools that I really like. And the rumen monitoring monitors, the magic number I've seen coming from Europe, 450 minutes. Once your cow gets over 450 minutes per day, by about 3 or 4 days, believe it or not, guys and gals, 3 or 4 days after calving, we're in pretty good shape as far as that goes. Mastitis sampling, you can use the CMT paddle test after you clear the colostrum, and I would like to be below 1 or below. Once you get in 2s or 3s, I'd keep her in the fresh pen to see what I'm going to do about that. Milk yield, we're going to give you the numbers here in just a minute. And of course, we already talked about the blood ketone test, a great tool. And you could either do it by using running blood through one of the precision guide units or running milk ketone tests. Again, this was in Hoard's Dairyman, and it says in the first 40 days, this is the level of milk. So this chart is very similar to the one we saw earlier. This is days in milk. So in red are all the fresh cow kind of numbers we're targeting. And again, you can see Jim has highlighted in tan kind of the most herds in the Midwest are going to be at. The really elite herds are going to be over 30,000 pounds of milk. And you can see where they are in first lactation, second lactation, and third lactation. And for our European colleagues, Jim did some extra work here and put all these numbers are in kilograms, so you can relate to. So it gives you a guideline. It says, okay, the question is, how fast are my cows coming up? Many of these cows now are coming through some type of a milking parlor in which we are getting daily milk weights. So if milk yield is increasing, I think that's a really good sign that this cow is ready to graduate by day 10. Then we're going to talk a quick word about our third pillar, and it goes very, very quickly, and that is cow comfort. And it's really important. In fact, there's been a webinar done by Rick Grant that says, wow, cow comfort and cow crowding is huge. These are all the factors. Some of these come from him, from Jim Drakely, Gary Etzel as well. Heifer groups would be ideal. I know if you only got 160 cows, you probably can't have heifer groups pre and postpartum. Bunk space, you can though. 30 inches for Holsteins, probably 20, 24, 25 for Jerseys as far as that goes. This is some older data, at least less than 90% capacity in the fresh cow pen and in the close-up pen. Sand is the gold standard, again, by our Wisconsin colleagues, and all these stress factors. Heat stress could be a factor. Cold stress can be a factor. Certainly, we can look disease, those things, crowding comes into play as well. A study done by Dr. Etzel and published in the Journal of Dairy Science. Again, you can see this is days in milk across the bottom. This is pounds of milk. This is going to be 30-inch bunk space. And you can see now we go down to 24-inch bunk space, and then we go to 20-inch bunk space. I'll let you Europeans and other people convert that to millimeters or centimeters. What's the bottom line? The bottom line, Dr. Etzel says, about 1.6 pounds less milk for every 6-inch decrease in bunk space. And you can see the milk curves on this one. Pretty powerful set of data as well. So, Corey, we're going to start wrapping up. We only got 5 minutes left. But I thought this would be a fun one to put in before we get to our multiple questions that are coming up here. And I call these key performance indexes, which simply says, what can you measure that may indicate your fresh cow rations are working well or have a chance to work well? And I think the first one is going to be culling rates. Again, this is something you can do right now on your farm. And it says how many cows in the cows that you cull from your farm in the last month, the last quarter, in 2018 or whatever, depending on your herd size. We would hope that the first lactation cows would be under 4%. This is data coming from Compierre, a big records group up in Wisconsin, Northern Illinois, and older cows under 7%. The old thumb rule was 8%. Hopefully we're slightly even below that. So again, if these cows are culled, cull meaning sold, died, whatever the case is, that's a nice KPI. Number 2, getting dry matter intakes. And I think this is key here. You can see these are the numbers that we are using. These are primarily close-up pens numbers that we'd like to have as far as that goes. I might, if I had a close-up group, then I would step them up from what I would call the maintenance group. These high straw diets are maintenance groups. In the last 21 to 28 days, I would probably jump them up in terms of starch, lower the fiber down, add some additives in there as well. These are my goals that I have for metabolic disorders. Some of them have a little bit of age on them. Remember, we said milk fever, hypocalcemia is going to be around 25%, subclinical ketosis around 30%, DA, some people say that's too high, some people would say 1 or 2%, and then of course retained placenta. So, you just have to have these numbers because they all are going to impact your transition and fresh cow group as far as that goes. Here are my additives. And we'll let you look at this as we go through here, and you can see all of them in green. Packer green, which means go for it as far as that goes. And one person did point out, well, and we got a small problem, a huge problem here, Jim, and I didn't see that, he did, and that is rumenzin or monenzin, about 400 milligrams. That's fairly aggressive, because in the fresh cow pen, these 450 milligrams will actually reduce ketosis and improve performance. So again, we jacked that number up just a little bit. We are now recommending in the fresh cow pen 15 grams of rumen-protected choline to help protect the rumen and drive dry matter intake. Niacin, especially if these cows are body condition score over 3.25, that's my magic trigger. I don't want my cows any heavier than 3.25. That's a Hutjens 3.25. I'm going to add 3 to 5 grams of rumen-protected niacin to help these cows avoid ketosis, and I'm going to keep an eye on direct-fed microbials. Here's KPI number 5. This looks at close-up dry cows, and you'll notice I am recommending chromium at 6 to 8 milligrams per cow per day. That is, and all these in green. That is organic. So basically, you can see these are my chromium, cobalt. Some of you were asking what numbers we're recommending there. Here they are. You can see about a part or all of it, basically in a fresh cow ration. About half of this selenium is going to be organic. The other half is going to be inorganic, primarily due to cost. If you've got money, go ahead and make it all organic. The chromium is all going to be organic as far as that goes. And you can see this replaces a part of that copper and zinc number as well. What's our take-home messages? And I think our take-home messages are that you just got to have a fresh cow approach. That may mean that you're going to use some of the high group TMR to make that ration. You may top dress that fresh cow diet, but I think the key is a fresh cow diet has to have healthy cows. And that's why I want a fresh cow diet. Do some dietary manipulation with fatty acids, amino acids, feed additives, and then get my cow pretty healthy, and then go ahead and move her on out. I think we ought to develop some early warning signals, and that is the fat mud thing that we talked about a bit earlier. And I love this visual that Jim did very nicely. Detect little problems before they become big problems. And big problems are dead cows, culling, cows that are gone. Timely treatment, appropriate protocols on farms, reduce the number of cows that have to be culled in early lactation, because now I've lost that lactation. And if it's a heifer, I've lost another 2 lactations on top of it. And of course, we know with today's milk prices, which on good news is coming up, we are going to have some challenges on profitability, and we should be in good shape. With that, Corey, I'll turn the program back to you before we go to the Q&A.
We have a pair of webinars that are coming up here. Our June 10th webinar will be synchronization strategies for heifers, and that will be presented by Joe Dalton of the University of Idaho. Then on the second Monday of the month in July, on July 8th, we'll be presenting calf scours, the best treatment practices, and that's going to be by Jeff Smith, a veterinarian from North Carolina State University, and that will be sponsored by Technics. So let's open it up for questions. I've been going through them here, Mike, and I've been trying to be a good student here and checking off the ones that have been asked. But one of them here was early on, what are the guidelines for fat supplementation in the transition cow period?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think Adam Locke's group and so are the group down in South Carolina are re-examining that as far as that goes. To me, if I had my herd, I would have some of the fatty acids that Adam Locke has worked with, and have them in my fresh cow, especially my fresh cow diet. The reason I'm hemming and hawing a little bit is there's some early work out of Wisconsin, Ohio State that says if you have high levels of fat in the fresh cow ration, ration, that will reduce dry matter intake because of the amount of NEFAs that are in the bloodstream already. And so these cows, metabolic system says we don't need any more fat. And so if you put too much fat in, so I would have in my fresh cow diet probably a modest level of fat, like maybe 3.5 to 4%. Of course, 1.5% of that's going to come from those fatty acids we talked about a bit earlier. And then when I get them into the milk cow ration, I'm going to go ahead and be up around that 5.5% as far as that goes. Corey, let's go ahead and take these two questions that came in there. We'll reward those people. Alfredo from Mexico, he says, well, I understand it's better to have a fresh cow group if you can't. Do you have any recommendation for the close-up diet and milk cow diet? And the answer is yes, I do. On the close-up diet, I'd step it up. I'd use that as a step-up protocol. So in other words, some of the numbers that you saw in my close-up diet, you might want to get those a little closer to the fresh cow diet as far as that goes there. And then in the milk cow diets, I'm not going to change it very much. I'm going to meet the guidelines there. And so you could use some of the high group TMR we mentioned a bit earlier, and then cheat that by putting in your other goodies in which might be like a kilo or 2 kilo pack, and you mix that in per cow per day into the high group TMR, and then dispense that out 38 pounds or whatever the case is going to be. I think we're in good shape on this one, Corey. We've covered this one here, except for vitamins, and we'll get in trouble here, I'm sure. We already got the mineral numbers, amino acid supplementation outlined, I think, very nicely. You must do the amino acid. You must have a rumen model. You must get the lysine methionine right, and the methionine, I think, is really important as far as that goes. On vitamins, I'm a little more aggressive than NRC. I'm going to stay with 2,000 units in my close-up cow and my fresh cow group. Vitamin, did I say A? I meant E. Vitamin E. I'm going to add 2,000 added units in my close-up and in my fresh cow pen. Some of you could take that down to 1,000, but they have all kinds of antioxidants and immunity values there that come into play. On the vitamin A and D, we stay pretty traditional, typically around 75,000 to 100,000 added vitamin A as an apple, and somewhere around 35,000 of vitamin D as in dog, as far as that goes. With that, I think, Corey, we've got them all taken care of. And do we have other questions?
For sure here. We have Ryan, a dairyman, that asked, we test blood to monitor BHBA levels in our herd. How often in that 3 to 16 day period post-calving should the cow be checked?
Well, that's a neat question, and my biased answer would be as frequently as possible. The big herds in Wisconsin, when they can take these samples and get them out to their DHI lab, they're doing it weekly. So they're pulling them every 7 days to get a profile. So there's a pretty good chance that most fresh cows are probably going to get at least 2, if not 3 checks on that to see where they're at. So I would say weekly would be ideal. I think when they did the big Wisconsin Cornell study, they were checking them a little more frequently than once a week. So good question.
So you talked about the digital cushion thickness, and one of our online viewers is wanting to know, what is the reference for the relationship between BCS, or body condition score, and digital cushion thickness? Is there a correlation?
Wow, great question. Easy answer. I don't know. I couldn't find the research paper over the weekend to go back and see if I could find more about it. So I really don't know. You've got some authors listed there. If you can hunt those authors down, they probably can answer that question.
Is there any limitation for corn silage inclusion rate in the fresh cow diets, Mike?
The answer, I'm going to answer 2 ways. Number one, I think, first of all, it has to be kernel processed and kernel processed correctly as far as that goes. So if we got a kernel process and it's meeting the Penn State guidelines, and of course we know that the top box has been reduced somewhat, but I would not, be honest with you, Corey, I would not go 100% corn silage. I would like to have one of my other traditional forages in there being either a grass, hay haylage, or alfalfa or small grain to give me a little more what I call coarse functional fiber. So again, if I could, have at least 2 kilos of that in my fresh cow diet as a minimum, or 5 pounds of that, the rest could be corn silage. If it's chopped at the right length, which right now we're looking at 3/4 of an inch theoretical length to chop, and processed correctly to make sure that the starch is available.
Well, this question here might be asking Corey Geiger how he voted in the presidential election, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it anyway. When talking about methionine, do you differentiate between the sources?
The answer is I do not. They are rumen protected. So if you're going the methionine, you got to feed it rumen protected. And so if you're out there, you ask these two questions. Number one, after, of course, cost will be important, but number one question is, what is the stability in the rumen? Ideally, you like to see at least 75 or 80% of it getting to the rumen as methionine. Then the next question asks for the research that says what percent is available in the small intestine. That number should also approach 90. As far as lysines are a little tougher, but in the 80%, that means about 64%, roughly 64% of the methionine you feed is going to be basically available to be absorbed as methionine. And so then after that, you're going to look at costs. Typical in the U.S. is somewhere, I've been told, around 2 cents per gram of methionine. So if you look at that Illinois study, we were looking at they're feeding 16 grams in the fresh group, or in early lactation, we're looking at somewhere around 30 cents. That's a big number. I understand that's a big number, but look at the milk and the dry matter and the health that you got for that. So that's a good point. There are a number of different products. We did a survey a couple of years ago, Corey, and there's 4 major ones, and I'll bet you a piece of pie there's more than 4 now of different companies that are out there. And of course, we all have our favorite ones, and that's where we'll leave it.
Very good. Question here from Carol. What are your recommendations for injectable vitamin supplements versus adding vitamin supplements to the feed? And I'm certainly thinking she's related right to the fresh cow period here on that one.
Yeah, the injectable vitamins, and of course, there's also injectable minerals that you could look at, and that's a favorite window as well on it. The good news, if you inject them, I don't have to worry about mixing, absorption. Do I have enough lipid in the diet to make sure they get across intestinal lining and things like that? So I think I'll get in trouble with some of my veterinary colleagues and maybe online. I would say if I inject, I'm pretty sure I've got the milligrams or the IUs or whatever, however they're being expressed there, going into the diet as far as that goes.
So another reader or online viewer read here a question, Mike. If you have one option, which one is more effective, choline or methionine?
Well, there's some controversy going on that one as well, and there's 2 camps out there. They're looking at label methyl groups. There's a methyl group in both of those as far as that goes. And, of course, choline has 3 of them, where methionine only has 1 of them as far as that goes. And there is some research that's done here at Illinois that shows methionine superior to the choline. There's also some research out there been published that choline is equal to, if not superior to, methionine. So I guess my take is, I'm going to put the methionine in as an amino acid, and I'll put the choline in for its function. And so I'm not going to answer that question. In other words, I'm going to be putting the 15 grams of choline in there, and I'll be putting in the 12 grams of methionine or whatever that number is for 2 different functions. And the same thing with niacin. They have different biological functions. But the question was, which one would you go with? If I had to pick one, and I know this will get me in trouble here today, I'd pick the methionine, because methionine does some pretty neat things that choline's not an amino acid, obviously, where methionine is. So I can kind of double dip or triple dip it from that aspect there. But I want to be very clear, I'd use both.
So this is going to be a 1-2 question here, but I'll ask the first one. What is the ideal BHBA test to monitor ketosis, or maybe your favorite couple?
Oh, wow. Wait, boy, that's a veterinary question as far as that goes. To me, I'd use the cow side test. Now that means you got to restrain the cow. You got to syringe. You got to get some blood, a couple drops of blood. You've got to use the $2.50 strip and stuff like that. So to me, that's where I would go. Some of my smaller herds, they will use the powder. That's the research in Canada looks good. There's a ketone powder that you can actually take and sample the milk at every milking if you want, or once a day is from that aspect there. The DHI, if you're aggressive, then you're going to sample them probably weekly. Then you could go with that one as well. So and bigger herds, I think I'd go with the DHI test if my state was offering it as far as that goes. A small herd, I might just go with the milk test cow side and just do it right there in the milking parlor, or right there in the stall as far as that goes. So you can kind of see where, depending on herd size, convenience, and cost, they all have differences.
Mike, I'm going to follow up with this in the PDF on page 6. You talked about taking fresh cow milk samples from the fresh cow pen to track some clinical ketosis, and some of the larger herds were actually sending those straight to a lab. How do you go about finding a lab that would do something like that?
Yeah, I think in Wisconsin it's pretty easy. I think most of the labs in Wisconsin provided. Labs in Minnesota are two of the big ones. Viroqua, the one at Sauk Center and the one down near Rochester, Zumbrota rather. They provided as well. So the question is, check with your local DHIA tester, and he or she should be able to tell you, A, if the test is available, B, will they take them in and do them. I know they do them up at in Minnesota because I talked to the lab managers there. And I think Wisconsin, they're doing it as well. So check with your local DHI source. Or I guess if you're in Iowa or Illinois, you could say, could I simply send my samples up to one of those other labs? And he says, sure you can. You can send your samples any place you want. Now, you better check with them to become a customer, for lack of a better word. There will be a cost associated with it. But so if your lab, your state doesn't provide that, then you could go to a state or a lab that does.
So another question here, what should be the acceptable body condition score at dry off, calving, and first insemination? Wow,
fun. I'm going to give you the academic answer, and then I'll give you my answer. They're going to be somewhat similar. At dry off, I'd want to be right around 3 at dry off, and I'm going to put them on a maintenance diet. The good news, if you put them close-up cows on an aggressive diet, Dr. Etzel and I agree that they're only there for 21 days. A calf is rapidly growing. You're going to produce colostrum. Cows are going through some stress period. You're not going to get fat cows in 21 days as far as that goes. In some cases, most of these heavy cows are coming into the dry pen too heavy as far as that goes. So basically, I'm going to be around when I walk a dry cow pen, any cow that's over 3.25, I write her number down. I give her a check as far as that goes. Any cow below 2.75, she is too thin. And I know there's a herd in Mexico. They would actually take those cows, put them in a subgroup, and feed them an extra 2 or 3 kilos of corn, and they could get the body condition score back to that 3.25 where they want to be. Then after calving, if you believe in Paul Fricke's dad out of Wisconsin, ideally, I'm not going to drop them at all. They'll stay right there. That's a tremendous challenge. It takes tremendous transition diets, tremendous management on the farm. But in a perfect world, no change in body condition score. These fresh cows are going to stay right at that 3.25. In the real world, I'm saying a 0.5 point. So if I'm calving it at 3.25, let's say that's kind of my high end number, then it says I would walk your breeding pen. I don't want to see anything below 2.75, and that's what I did when I walked those herds in Mexico. Basically, I would rather than score every cow, I would just either they were okay, and either they were under 2.75 or over 3.25 if you're in the breeding pen and or the dry cow pen.
Well, we have a lot of questions here, Mike. I'm sorting through them because I think some of them were answered in your presentation. I was listening very well, but here's one. In fresh cows, I'm using 250 grams per cow per day of calcium propionate in the first 20 to 30 days. Is that a good option? My results have been pretty good so far.
Okay, how many grams again, Corey? I'm going to have to write that down.
250 grams per cow per day.
Right. Well, first of all, I'm guessing if he's getting that in by feeding it, hooray for him or her, because these are usually unpalatable. They have unique odors associated with them. And so we normally say if you're going to feed them and not drench them, about 1/3 of a pound. And you can see this is almost 1/2 pound. So they're big effects. That's big effect. If you were drenching, I'd go to 1 pound. If I was going to drench them as far as that goes. But if she or he can get them to eat 250 grams, hooray for you. That's a nice level. That's a nice level. Higher is always better. It means I get more calcium. You're not going to get a lot of calcium because of the chemical composition of calcium propionate, but good job. Good job. So in a perfect world, he or she is over my minimum.
Well, here's another question, and certainly a little bit more behavior, but affects fresh cows, Mike. Does frequent change in groups from close-up to maternity to fresh and post-fresh affect production of the cow and reproduction? And we're talking about how many moves that the cow makes.
Wow. Spot on, Corey. Very controversial. In fact, some people recommend once this cow calves, put her in the high group or the heifer group and just let her go. Let her go. And if she's healthy, hooray for you. You've done well. I like the step up. And you'll see that if I'm talking, I'm going to have the maintenance far off dry cow, the close-up step-out group, and you give me that, then if you're not going to give me a fresh cow group, that I'm going to do most of my activity, most of my changes at that point there. But then I'd go to the fresh cow group, and the magic number would be probably nothing less than 10. There's some pretty good work out of California saying that when you move cows more frequently than less than 10 days, you are going to affect dry matter intake. And the minute you affect dry matter intake and social interaction, then you're going to affect reproduction as well. So I think if you can keep these cows at least 10 days in that group, and ideally 21, and I am just looking at my poll, both numbers here, I can see half of you would say they're going to be in that fresh cow pen for 10 to 30 days. I would hope. I would suggest, I would cross my fingers that the social interactions and impacts on dry matter intake will correct. But you're right. Every time you move cows, and you got to move groups of cows, don't move one, you got to move groups of cows, then you run the risk of having a decreased dry matter intake, and now you know the rest of the story.
I think I've been looking through the questions here. Many of them have been answered in one shape or form here, but there's one other question here. Let's see if I can find it. Mr. Hutjens, what do you mean about the Goldilocks ration in the hold during the dry period? What about, is the level of 47 to 49% NDF, is that the target? It seems a little high. So that's
I went back and in fact, we presented this data in China, and the NDFs are sitting, summers are on in the mid 40s. So maybe 47, 49 is a little on the high side for the Goldilocks maintenance diet. But again, to me, that's got written all over it. You got to be getting roughly 16 to 18 mcals of energy into these cows. And so if your cows are eating high levels of intake, then that number is doable. If they aren't eating as much as we want them to eat, which is going to be roughly 28 to 30 pounds of dry matter, then you back it on down. So it seems to me the straw or the NDF becomes the fill factor. That's exactly what it's doing as far as that goes. So that number, it's going to be in the mid 40s. 49 might be a tad high, but Dr. Drakely's research, they're all sitting in the mid 40s.
Well, thank you, Mike. I think that was that wraps up our questions here. Would really appreciate you for your great insight, Mike, especially as much as you've been traveling lately. Also want to thank Zinpro Performance Minerals for sponsoring our webinar today. To view this webinar again, or any of our previous webinars, you can visit our archives anytime at www.hoards.com/webinars. Just go to the homepage, you'll find it. It's very prominent. Also, receive an email survey later this week. In that survey, tell us how Mike and Corey and our team did here, and you can evaluate the presenter and the topic. We really do appreciate your feedback, and we look through those quite extensively. We hope you'll make plans to attend our next webinar, which will take place on Monday, June 10th. That title again is Synchronization Strategies for Heifers, and it'll be presented by Joe Dalton, University of Idaho. Again, thank you to Zinpro Performance Minerals for the support of this webinar, and thank you so much, Mike, for this great presentation. And last but not least, thank you to all the listeners out there. We strive to provide information that's useful for you on your dairy and your client's dairy, and we're thankful you took time to join us. Until next time, goodbye from all of us here in Fort Atkinson at Hoards Dairyman and the University of Illinois.